Hello everyone and welcome to my bunker in the attic. This is a bit of a new setup for me. I'm in the middle of upgrading some technology. One of the things that I have done is I've moved over there, got a camera, and then look at this whole situation. I am settling in here rapidly. Now, I've got a whole new situation going on, and I do have an RGB keyboard that looks like lava. You've also caught me this morning, because it's the morning for me, it's first thing in the morning. You've caught me watching some YouTube. So I've got my YouTube on. I've been watching this channel I really like. Let me influence you to this channel. Shauna Rapari, if that's how you pronounce her last name. Pretty much, I really like her channel because she analyzes micro consumption trends and patterns on TikTok. And then she makes videos pretty much telling you why that's some BS and de-influences you so that you don't participate and you don't have to spend your money on things that you don't need. I really appreciate that because I am the type of person that definitely in the past I've not been completely in alignment with myself, so I have exported certain anxieties onto consumption and the acquisition of items. Like one of the biggest examples I tell people about is notebooks. Man, I used to collect notebooks and I love stationery. Who in their right mind doesn't love a new notebook or some good stationery? I definitely do, but I used to use it really as a way to avoid a lot of uncomfortable feelings. It was a way I could pretend to be productive, feel that sense of potential unfolding before me and not have to do anything about it. So I stopped collecting the notebooks. I started getting into writing, actually making stuff. But the point of that is there's kind of a direct psychological relationship sometimes between the way you have anxiety or you're avoiding something or you're feeling complicated and buying stuff and putting stuff in your house. And it's that dynamic I want to talk about, and a trait in society that I shall call bunkerism. Now, what the heck is that? What am I talking about? Well, I've definitely been guilty of this before. Because within the concept of bunkerism, one half of this, like, we understand something is going on when we see people who have bunkers, doomsday bunkers. Let's look at some. Now, I've talked about this documentary before. This is the documentary Bunker by Jenny Perlin. And it shows people, men, mostly men, who have built doomsday bunkers to protect themselves from utter annihilation, the nuclear fallout, the apocalypse. Insert catastrophic event here. And the film isn't explicitly about it, but we do understand the filmmaker's sense that there's an eroticism around this. It's mostly men. We see that the values tend to be more conservative, libertarian, because of the hyper individualism, the hyper kind of in-group mentality where only a few can survive, or only the individual can survive. And there is not a trust, maybe in the outside world, to provide anything, and there's not a sense of goodwill. A lot of these are highly secured. They're protecting against other people in the apocalypse as well as the apocalypse. Now, this is fascinating because it's so extreme. We tend to wave it away and we say, oh, well, that's just a product of like the pure, fringe libertarian. You can go out and, do that. We don't give it much thought. However, I have seen something which I think is eerily similar, and I've seen it on TikTok, and so has Shauna Rapari. That's why I like her channel. There is something that we understand as hyperconsumption, in which there are videos of people stockpiling, but aesthetically stockpiling, things like snacks in the fridge, little cute cans of soda, makeup, clothing, home goods, pretty much building an aesthetic of abundance. There's an aesthetic of abundance, but it isn't quite the aesthetic of abundance like in a gorgeous still life of silver and fruit and something that could have been painted for royalty like a portrait. This is different. This is about material goods that create a sense of completeness together, right? They're satisfying visually because of how complete these collections are. You got all your makeups and junk. There's something similar I've noticed in the bunker apocalyptic vision of survival, where there is an aesthetic of survival, where there's a sense of satisfaction of somebody sharing their picture of their well-stocked pantry and thinking, wow, look at all my cans of corn. Look at all my cans of corn. Now, to me, I actually struggle to see a difference between the shelves of cans of corn and a shelf of Maybelline lipstick. You want to hoard makeup, or do you want to hoard corn? I don't know. I would shove those out of the way and say, are you okay? What's going on here? Because for a particular reason, and that is within the concept of bunkerism, which is that if you follow what is essentially an aesthetic and emotional act of building a hoard and a collection of material goods to ensure oneself against collapse, anxiety, etc., you can follow the line down to your more fringe survivalist bunkers, and you say, well, they are insuring themselves against the future. They are insuring themselves against the future, whatever, insert disaster. While the consumer, the survivalist, so the consumer is insuring themselves against the present, but they are insuring themselves. This is about creating an aesthetic sense of wholeness and completeness and safety and security against some type of doom, some type of existential doom. And I don't think I can be convinced otherwise on this TikTok front side of things. Do you know how cats roll in catnip? You ever seen that? Let's find some pictures of that. Oh yeah. I've seen this. I love when the cats roll around in this stuff and they just go nuts. I feel like that sense of like, oh yeah, we get that when things are aligned. Oh, the perfect puzzle piece is right into place. The collection is perfect. We have one of every color in the crayon box, and none of them have been used. We are rolling around in the aesthetic catnip. That type of aesthetic presentation and enjoyment is a part of bunkerism, in which, like a dragon on the horde, you can survey around you, and the sheer completeness within your external world alleviates a deep sense of anxiety in you. Now, I think why these things are interesting is not because I think these are like deep flaws with people, because I've done this as well. It's very interesting how these things manifest, because I think on the consumer side, we don't politicize it as much as we do people who are interested in survival. But I also think bunkerism as an idea, if you think about it, it's relatively been rare in history that your average person could afford to stockpile like kind of vanity products. Do you know what I mean? Like, people have been able to store food for the winter, and build a stockpile and build shelter and try and survive in that way, have candles, have firewood ready. But this new part of bunkerism, which is the consumer product, your kind of vanity products or toys, DVDs, makeup, perishable goods, like just literally having an insane quantity of cheese sticks and Baby Bell cheese. What? If you think about that, that is so new, where pretty much your average person can afford at some level to have multiples of anything at any one time, and consumption is rampant, right? Like rampant consumption. So I think for like an anthropological lens, to look at something and not a judgmental lens, but just like, doesn't this, I think in locating that there is a common thread between these in bunkerism, and that bunkerism describes a fraught relationship of the self and society, the self and the self, the self and the sense of longevity, that I think it's quite interesting to analyze what that might mean in our world, why people are doing this, needing to do this. The biggest thing I can think of actually involves my own little bunker right here, where I kind of ensure I build one part of my life up with material goods and aesthetic sense of wholeness and completeness and coziness, because I need that. I feel I need that to support the other part of my life, which is my work life, which actually provides me a lot of anxiety. It's a part of my life that people don't really see often, because, I'm just filming about other things, I'm talking about other things. But a huge part of my life is right now, and has always been, work. I've always had jobs. I have a full-time job right now. The reality is, I like my job, but it presents me with a kind of anxiety and existential feeling of being lost that is unique to the world of work. I find it quite unique. I don't experience those emotions in my life. In fact, I have a rock and roll time of life, to be honest with you. I've got a cowboy attitude, a can-do spirit. I navigate complexity well. I love being busy. I always have stuff to think about and do. So my work life is really the only area where I feel chronically pressure. I feel like not quite in the real world. I feel like I'm having to cognize things that don't make much sense. And it's stressful. So to get through that, and I work remote, So it's totally invisible. When I had an in-person job and I had to put on slacks every day, I felt like a trained monkey. Wearing my little work shoes, I felt like a trained monkey, showing up trapped at a desk. Now, I work remote, and so I've actually just caught myself spending money, just trying to make my body as comfortable in my space as I can, because I go into this zone mentally where those effects are still the same. I'm still very like, this is not normal. This is not natural. And so that is revealing that dynamic. It is partly why when people go after Disney adults and start to make fun of, low-hanging fruit, like, people who make fun of people who watch anime, I just instantly lean in and I'm like, okay, how are you gonna critique this? Like, it's typically from some angle about adults not growing up, and which I always have the reaction of like, no, I think it's probably the result of adults having to grow up and live in a system that is not hospitable or natural or normal. And so you can't have, to me, the discussion about people who do cosplay and Disney adults without talking about joy. And so I tend to, anyone who kind of critiques adults having fun, I tend to get really defensive, because I recognize in myself long patterns of using material goods and leaning into the joy of them and the satisfaction of them to build a bit of a space for me that protects me against stress. We can kind of tell when that behavior starts to tip into truly the stockpiling, and that, I think, is when you start to need a new word, which is why I'm calling bunkerism, because now you are really building material insurance against those very complicated feelings. The person who cosplays and owns DVDs and a Yankee candle, an autumn Yankee candle, and wants to just vibe in their apartment or their house or their room, we all know what that is, right? We start to completely tip into bunkerism as again an existential chronic position of the self that is exporting into a sense of aesthetic completeness. We know when you tip into that, sometimes a kind of sister branch that doesn't have the aesthetic component of completeness, this is the kind of underside of this, is hoarding. We know that when we see that, we've tipped into a kind of scattered, disorganized sense of insurance, while on the top layer, bunkerism is the organized sense of material insurance. And in that, in this field of spectrum, you have your survivalist bunkerists who are insuring themselves against the future, and we have your consumer bunkerists who are insuring themselves against the anxiety of the present, the collapse of the present, and they are surrounding themselves with multiples of their comfort. Insert their favorite comfort item, their favorite status item. There's an excess that we tend to really pull back from and say, whoa, dang, are you okay, right? The survivalist has more of the biological justification, and the consumerist does not have that. So it's quite an interesting difference. But to me, this is a category of way of living and being in the world, so it has to have a name. And both of these behaviors fall within that name, hoarding being the disorganized underside of that term, separate from it. But yeah, I had to think about things in that term, because as I've been doing my redecorating up here and getting this keyboard think about the satisfaction it gives me. I think about the long pattern of behavior of myself being horrible with money and finding a greater sense of value in, instead of saving my money as like real, material insurance for the future, like a savings account, I will spend it on the Yankee Candle and be like, I'm safe while I go to work. And I'm not judging that. I'm noticing that and I'm saying, okay, this is very interesting. And there can probably be more anthropological discussions about these things, which is why when people, again, they go after the Disney adults all the time, and I'm like, back up. Now, when I start to tip from what is kind of just, I think, healthy comfort and decorating into bunker territory where I'm really starting to become neurotic and my consumption is excessive, I have found that it has helped to take some of that structure, some of what I'm seeking, and try and integrate that into myself as best as I can. So, for example, I'm about to go to work, right? And I'm going to enter into that psychic space that's uncomfortable for me and not normal and not natural and feels like pressure. So not only am I going to like breathe, have a hot cup of coffee, have a candle, and relax as best as I can in my material circumstances, I've also built a structure of filming ASMR videos and putting them on the internet. And that internal structure of not only a hobby, but truly like a way of connection, that aligned in me as a priority is a way, it's just like the coffee and it's like the candle, but it's non-material, where instead of consuming something, I'm generating something that is my break outside of work. It makes me feel normal. It makes me feel good. I'm lucky that my hobbies do not cause me that same kind of strange pressure, stress that work does. And it's important to have that, so people say, well, stop buying stuff, go outside. If you're tipping into bunkerism, if you're really tipping there, it's time, I think, to integrate some internal sense of self and structure. And if you're going in the consumer side of bunkerism, I think finding ways of building a structure instead of consuming something, but making a structure that's kind of a support system against stress and against insecurity. Now, survivalist bunkerists, that's a little bit different because, what can you locate within yourself in an apocalypse? Hopefully you've got some faith and some resolve, but you need your material goods. I think it's when they start to tip into the consumerist too that it's time for a reevaluation. When you get kind of your survivalist person who becomes obsessive over this material world and who starts to freak out over their stockpile, you've tipped into this mentality which can be harmful in excess. So that's my thoughts about material and this way of relating to material that I sometimes see on the internet, and just my thoughts on it in general. I also really appreciate you just hanging out with me before work, being part of my structure that keeps me from spending money and obsessing over goods, but does keep me sane as I navigate the world of work and do my job. And so I really appreciate you being a part of that. That's everything to me. If I made videos and nobody watched them, it would not be as satisfying. I don't know if I would do it, to be honest. So I just really appreciate it. I feel very connected. And yeah, I appreciate you being with me as I try new tech stuff. I I'll have some new microphones as well, hopefully next time. I'm gonna get those set up. So, yeah, thank you just for being here, and as always, no matter where you are, whatever you're up to, I hope that you have some small insurance against the present moment, whether you have a cup of coffee, or a blanket, or you just breathing in your car, whatever you need to be doing. I hope that you're able to do it. And yeah, I will see you very, very soon in another video. With my RGB backlit keyboard. So, thank you again. Good night, if it's night, and good